In this brief video, we're going to talk about margins and understanding the health of our business. When we look at our businesses, we can look at the spreadsheets to really tell the story of how healthy our business is. Now, as someone who's worked in management consulting for many years, there's really just a few things I look at initially when I start tearing apart the financials to see the health of any business. Now, it's important to note that every industry has different margins. In your industry, there's going to be certain norms and specifics for margins. So I need to speak in generalities for it to apply to a wider set of businesses. So typically the first thing we look at is the cost of goods and the profit margin. In the apparel world, if it costs you $10 to make a t-shirt fully printed, tagged, and bagged, and you sell that to a customer online, you might be able to sell that for 3 times more. So you can sell a t-shirt for $30. That's a pretty healthy margin. But the second you start working in retail, you have to cut that in half. You make it for 10, maybe you're selling it to the retailer for 15, 18. They're selling it to the end customer for 35, 36. Your margins start getting thinner. So it's the same thing with across all products. We start looking at your profit margin. Now, where do we want to see your profit margin? Definitely we'd like to see it double. That's healthy. But again, it depends on your industry. So we kind of start at this doubling down of your profit margin, and then we work forward or backward from there. Now, what can we do to increase our profit margins on physical products? Typically, there's very few things you can do if you're not the manufacturer of those products. If you're white labeling things and putting your logos and designs on them or whatever you're doing with your products, there's only so much you can do if you're the reseller of that product. So typically what you do is you increase the price. That's the one thing you can do to increase your profit margin. Now, if you are the manufacturer, then yes, you're starting to look at raw materials, the time and labor it takes to create those products that we're going to resell. But these are the things that we start to look at, is really looking at the profit margin and the margins of your products that you're selling. Now, in the services side of things, we're typically looking at the cost of services sold, which is labor. How many people does it take to deliver your service? So in the world of writing, let's say business plans, if you sell a business plan for $10,000 and it only takes one person to write the business plan, it could be very profitable, especially if that person can get that business plan done in a short period of time. So we start dealing with hours and margins on markup and margins of hours. Now, when it comes to services, let's take our business plan example. I like to see margins in maybe the 30% arena. So if we sell a business plan for $10,000, mentally I'm thinking, can I get that produced for $3,000 worth of time and effort and labor? And if I can push that number down, great. But I'm baking in about 35% or so just for the services sold. When I look at advertising agencies, largely service-based, I'm looking at the total labor at about 35%. Now, the second you start seeing your labor going up to 45%, 50, 60, 70%, you're now what we call top heavy. And we have to deal with that. What are things that we can do to start decreasing that top heaviness inside of the organization? Now, those are 2 very simple examples. Creating products for, let's say, an apparel company or writing business plans. The world is way more complicated than this, and there are many more factors that come into it. But when we start thinking about the margins and our profit margins, the very first place we look at is the cost of products or the cost of services. And then we have to play with our margins from there. And hopefully we're bringing them down to make the business more profitable. The next thing I like to look at is just general operating expenses. Now, your general operating expenses can entail various things like rent, utilities, supplies, toilet paper, you name it, whatever you need to fill up your office, whatever utilities, if you're paying for cell phones, if you're paying for the internet, if you're paying for physical equipment, licenses, things of that nature, it all kind of comes into this operating expenses. Now, again, based upon your business and your industry, these numbers are going to fluctuate, but your operating expenses, your general operating expenses, back office expenses, they shouldn't really be exceeding, let's say, 5 to 10%. Now, they can go into the 20%. I have seen that in various arenas. But again, we're really just trying to keep these fixed operating expenses nice and tight. They shouldn't be a runaway train, and it shouldn't be drowning the company. Now, I have seen this in the world of, let's say, retail, where you're paying $20,000, $30,000 a month for rent, maybe even more if you're in a shopping mall or some highly desired location. That one expense in your operating expense could potentially just be a runaway train and eat deeply into your margins. So we need to be really aware of these runaway trains inside of our operating expenses. Another operating expense is software. Now, in the age of technology, it's not uncommon for the average business to have 15 to 20 pieces of software that they're subscribing to every single month. Think about MailChimp and HubSpot and G Suite, Outlook, QuickBooks, project management tools, marketing tools. It just kind of goes on and on. So when we're looking at the profit and loss and we go into the operating expenses and we start looking at software expenses, we really want to keep a close eye on this, especially because a lot of these software providers will simply increase their fees or continue to charge us for seats and licenses that we're not really even using. So again, we want to try to keep our overall OpEx to the 10-15% arena. Again, this number is just varying based upon your business, but if we see operating expenses that are 40-50%, we're really scratching our head and saying, why? If we see that our cost of goods is over 60-70%, we're scratching our heads again and saying, why? We also need to look at the cost of sales. Selling products comes with an inherent cost. If you're selling digital products or products online, you're most likely looking at your marketing cost. How much did it cost for us to buy a customer, acquire a customer using Facebook and LinkedIn ads and Twitter ads and whatever other ads you're using if you're running podcasts or whatever advertising landscape you're in, you're going to attribute that towards driving revenue. That would be your cost of sales. If you're in a service-based business, you're typically paying sales reps, and your sales reps are going to get, call it 10-15%. That seems to be pretty standard across the board from what I've seen. We also need to look at our net margins. So in a healthy business, you should be sitting between 10 to 20% net profit. There are some businesses that go way beyond 20% net profit, especially if you're just purely delivering a service. That's easy. Because as a consultant, you can say, yeah, it's $100,000 to do this thing, and it may only take you a few hours to get that thing done. I've seen some consultants charge crazy numbers and highly, highly profitable. So of course their margins are well beyond 20%. When we look at it from a mergers and acquisition standpoint, a 20% EBITDA net margin is a very good, very healthy business. And a business that's below 10% on your net profits, we start to ask questions of why. Now, some businesses just run on thin margins. If you're in the airline business or if you're in trucking and logistics, they typically run on very thin margins. So again, you have to take it with a grain of salt per industry. But again, if you're sitting in that 10 to 20% EBITDA universe, you're in a healthy universe. And our job is always to try to push that margin up and up and up to get more and more profit inside of the business to a healthy place. So even just having the knowledge of where your net margins should be could be a big factor and a game changer for how you approach your business, how you invest into your business, where you want to spend your money. If you're operating your business and you don't know these numbers, you're kind of moving through the universe blind with a blindfold on. And it's not until someone takes that off and you can stare at the spreadsheets and stare at your numbers where you go, wow, I wish I've known that sooner. And that's usually the light bulb moment for a lot of business owners, because then it starts to play into your overall valuation, the value of your company. Because in many cases, if you're looking or speaking with a broker or an acquiring business, the first thing they're going to look at is your net margins, and they're going to put a multiple on that. So if you're unaware of what your net margins are, then you're simply handicapping yourself in the business universe. So again, these are just a few of the things that we start to look at when we tear apart a profit and loss statement, and just to kind of look at the financial health of the business. We're looking at what are the cost of sales, what is the cost of producing the product or delivering the service, and what are our profit margins there? What is our additional labor expenses, things that aren't directly associated to the delivery of the product or the service? And then we're also looking at our overall operating expenses, rent, utilities, software, things behind the scenes, back office that keeps the business flowing. And we want to make sure we have good, healthy margins across the board. So whether it's 10% for your sales reps or 10-15% for your operating expenses, 30%, 40% for your labor expenses, these are benchmark numbers. So my recommendation, and I do this for every one of my clients, is I build a custom dashboard. Naturally, you can have this done inside of QuickBooks. You can just export your P&L every single month. But I like the use of a custom dashboard because we can have all of our numbers, all of our percentages in there. And then it really starts to gauge us of where we're headed. It's our guide. It's our North Star. So if I see every single month, as I do, that certain margins are increasing and increasing, it starts getting out of our comfort zone, that's something that I like to have instant access to, almost even on a weekly or daily basis in some businesses that are high volume and high intensity. So we can jump on a call quickly and say, hey, these margins are getting a little out of control. What can we do? So we're either looking for opportunities to increase revenue, drive more revenue that increases our sales and marketing budgets, or we're looking for opportunities to decrease expenditures from the operating side, reducing software expenses, negotiating fees on leases and rents and things of that nature. So I hope this video is helpful. I know when you're running your business, it's very complicated and there's a lot of numbers coming at you 24/7. My recommendation is that you build a custom dashboard. If you want more information on how to get that done, find me, DM me, contact me. We can jump on a call about this. If you enjoy this video, please leave a comment, like, subscribe, and we'll see you on the next video.